Well, I work in the field of ADHD with adults. That's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Well, that's what it's called. It's not what it is. What it actually is attention dysregulation and hyperactivity disorder. People think that ADHD is a hyperactive child, usually a boy who gets into trouble a lot, and in actual fact, although ADHD has been described in the medical literature for over 100 years, there was a time when it was thought to be a disruptive behaviour disorder of childhood. And that was awful because the poor kid who has ADHD actually just has a busy brain. His default network is whizzing around inside and he has trouble being able to get his focusing network to turn that lot off so he can focus on what he wants to do, except when somebody shouts at him, then he gets a lot of adrenaline and that actually helps. So the poor kid is used to being shouted at. If you're diagnosing disruptive behaviours of childhood, you're probably not going to diagnose many girls, are you? Because most girls know that if they sit still, even if their brain is whizzing around inside, they're not going to be picked up. So fortunately, we've got a better understanding of ADHD than we did even 20 years ago. And we've been picking up a lot of adults who've said, I've got a really busy brain. And sometimes it works really well and sometimes it doesn't really work very well at all. And how come that is? So I actually get the privilege of helping them to put some glasses on to be able to see their own brain and be able to understand what's going on there. And ADHD it's very common. It's about 5% of the population.
Well, 5%.
5%. It's quite a lot. And it is genetic. So in terms of the things that are genetic, eye colour is high, very genetic. We know that. Height as well, and ADHD is just under there. Lots of other disorders we have like depression and schizophrenia, which have biological bases, are less genetic. There's more environmental factors involved. But anyway, so it's genetic. So what do we do? If we diagnose one person in the family and the other people in the family are going, hang on, I thought this was hyperactive boys. No. This is a person with a busy brain who's trying really hard to focus. Sometimes they focus well and sometimes they don't. And then lots of other people in the family come up and go, oh, I think I've got that too. Then they go, yeah, but it's not a bad thing most of the time. If my busy brain is busy, I'm creative and I'm an entrepreneur, or I'm really fun with the kids. A lot of people go, well, I've got a busy brain, but I'm fine. And other people come and they go, I've got a busy brain and I'm exhausted from trying to focus. Or I was really good when I was managing things where there was a bit of scaffolding around me where I didn't, someone else told me what to do. So we have kids who come in high school. They were fine in year 9 because everybody's brain's all over the place. And then we get them at year 10 and 11 and 12 and they go, I just can't focus. So we teach them what's going on with their brains and we help them to be able to manage.
That is amazing. So you're saying that the well-designed communication system in our brains has kind of gone off kilter.
Yeah. There's actually a biological advantage. It's called the hunter-gatherer genes, the Viking genes. Now, I'll tell you where the main genetic change is in those little reuptake vacuum cleaners in the synapses, particularly in your frontal lobe, which is the part of the brain that does the project management of everything else.
Yep.
Okay, so if you had extra vacuum cleaners and there's the chemical dopamine is probably the main one, you send out your dopamine. If you've got extra vacuum cleaners, it gets sucked up too fast, so you don't get the dopamine messages. And dopamine's to do with that task positive network of looking, focusing, staying on track, going to a goal. If you haven't got dopamine messages, the default network is going along and you're busy thinking about all sorts of different things. Or you might hyper-focus on one particular thing and then you can't stop to be able to do the next thing that you need to be able to do. Okay, so that's not the entire story for ADHD because the whole of the brain is involved, particularly the cerebellum, which sort of evens things out for movement as well as evens things out for thinking. But you've got your frontal lobe, which is the part of the brain which is managing everything and using dopamine as a message to say we need to focus on that and not on that. and the messages are intermittent, which is really interesting when you think about it. If the receptors weren't working at all, that's receiving, you wouldn't get any messages. But if you've got a problem with extra vacuum cleaners in the reuptake ones, what happens is you send out a packet of dopamine, and if you send out a lot, you get a message going through and you're quite normal. And if you send out a small amount, a lot of that gets sucked back up and you don't get the messages coming through. So most people with ADHD have learned if they're in an environment where there's lots of dopamine, lots of fun and excitement or drama or fear, they're often wonderful in a crisis, and they go, oh, in a crisis I can think clearly, but otherwise I just can't get my work done. So they've actually discovered that if they're in some areas where there's lots of dopamine, they do well, or they find things to give them dopamine. And remember we mentioned the reward network?
Yes.
That runs on dopamine as well. And everything that gives a reward goes through, will give you a shot of dopamine. Alcohol, all the bad drugs, caffeine, sugar. Sugar gives a lot of dopamine. And a lot of people who've got these busy brains, they get to the point of they either get addicted to or they've learned, if I give myself a shot of sugar or something else, I'm going to be able to function very well. So that causes a lot of trouble because we've got this brain where the brain is running the life, and if you're doing something which is making your life worse, then you start to get depressed and anxious, and then they come in to see us and we go, oh, have you got a busy brain? And they go, yeah, I've always had a busy brain. And then it's a matter of helping them to understand how their brain works, and then maybe they can make some healthy choices to up their dopamine instead. So let me tell you about dopamine. So where do we get that? Do you think it just floats into the brain? No. Okay. And this is where the whole body is designed, and we're also designed to be in our own environment because where you get dopamine from, it's a little chemical. It comes from another amino acid called tyrosine, and tyrosine comes from protein, or your gut bacteria can make it. So you've got your brain, and if it had just evolved, I think, how did it evolve that everything fits in with everything? So to get your dopamine, you've actually got to have either good gut bacteria, or you've got to have a source of protein, which means you've got to have some legs to run around, and you've got to be able to chew your protein and absorb it and digest it, and then you've got to transport it to your brain. So if we just look at dopamine, you go, the whole body is connected. And because I work in that field where people have this dopamine problem, I basically trawl through all of their life and their medical history and their family history and go, okay, do you have anything wrong with your gut? Because if your gut isn't working properly, your dopamine might not work.
Wow.
And there are some people who have celiac disease, so they are allergic to gluten. So if they have gluten, the gut doesn't work terribly well at all, and then they get brain fog. If they have ADHD, it gets worse, and if they don't have ADHD, they have those symptoms. And once we can help them with the gluten and their brain and their gut heals, I've seen people who said, oh, my brain's working fine now. Or the people with ADHD say, my brain's working better than it was. So we go and we look at, and then the other thing is, where else do you get dopamine from? Well, you need a little protein factory to make the tyrosine into actually L-DOPA, which is then turned into dopamine, which is then going to adrenaline. Where do you get little factories from? Well, they're made by the DNA. And where do you get the things to make the factories? Well, they're proteins, so you've got to have all the essential amino acids. So again, you've got to have a village to feed you to actually survive, to do these things. So everything is interlinked. That's design. That's not evolution.
I mean, it's just staggering to listen to all the processes that a message has to go through, or where they get their energy so that the brain can function well. So you're not really just talking about the brain not being able to evolve on its own, because it needs the body at the same time.
Yeah, but the body needs the brain, and everything's interconnected, and there's no way that happened bit by bit by bit. Even if it could, time and chance, they say, is the thing. Well, chance, it's not going to work because it will take you billions of years. And you still need to have design. You still need someone to make it.